Our next session is a leadership panel, as you can tell from the wonderful women who are sitting on stage. But I couldn't help but think, when Shelley mentioned belonging and fortitude, what amazing words for this next group of women. You all have been inspirations for me during my journey at Colorado State. Some of you I met when I was a freshman, Blanche. And others of you I have met along the way. But the way that you've created belonging on our campus and the fortitude that you have put into your own careers and to move Colorado State University is incredibly inspiring. We are so grateful for you all, for your investment of time today, and for your willingness to be a little bit vulnerable, and for your openness in sharing your experiences as women in higher education. Our moderator today will be Interim Provost Jan Nerger. Dr. Nerger is CSU's Chief Academic Officer and provides leadership to the university's colleges and schools, overseeing the university's academic mission and enterprise. She has been at CSU for more than 30 years and has served in other leadership roles, including Dean of Natural Sciences, Associate Dean of Academics for the College of Natural Sciences, Acting Chair for the Department of Psychology, Program Coordinator for Experimental Psychology, and Division Coordinator for Behavioral Neurosciences. Dr. Nerger is a very strong advocate for diversity, particularly for women in science, and is the co-founder of the Women in Natural Sciences organization at Colorado State University. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here today and moderating this panel. Dr. Blanche Hughes is in her 15th year as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Colorado State University and serves on the President's leadership team. In her role, Blanche works collaboratively with many other units to provide crucial support for our students and staff to be successful. She teaches a first-year undergraduate seminar course, as well as teaching and advising in the Student Affairs and Higher Education graduate program. I must also say your work in alumni relations is probably not in your job description, but thank you so much for all you do to keep our alumni connected. Before becoming Vice President, Blanche spent 6 years as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and 11 years as the Director of Black Student Services at CSU, where I met her. We were neighbors 2 doors away from each other in Aylesworth Hall. Thank you for being on our panel today. Dr. Lise Youngblade is the Dean of the College of Health and Human Sciences, a role that she's held since August of 2019. She is an applied developmental scientist whose areas of specialization include child and adolescent socio-emotional development, access to healthcare for vulnerable youth, program evaluation, and analysis of developmental processes in educational and community contexts. Lisa has previously served as both Associate Dean for Research and Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives, where she was responsible for leading specific initiatives that benefit the college. Welcome, Lisa. Dr. Karen Estlund is the Dean of Libraries for Colorado State University Libraries, a role that she began in December of 2019. Prior to joining CSU, Karen served as the Associate Dean for Technology and Digital Strategies for the Pennsylvania State Libraries and coordinated collaborations with the Penn State University Press. In the summer of 2021, under Karen's leadership, CSU Libraries launched their strategic plan and articulated the role of librarians and librarianship within CSU's Principles of Community. Welcome, Karen. Dr. Sue James is the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at CSU. In her role, Sue is responsible for working with faculty, deans, other vice provosts, and vice presidents to ensure well-supported faculty and exemplary teaching and learning practices. Sue is a professor of mechanical engineering who joined CSU's faculty as an assistant professor in 1994. She served as head of the department from 2010 to 2018 and is the founding director of the School of Biomedical Engineering. Welcome, Sue, and thank you all so much for being here with us today. This session is meant to be interactive. Knowing Jan, she's got some great questions and prompts already up her sleeve, but we are hoping that you also have some questions that you can ask our panelists during this program. I'd also like to give a quick recognition to Dr. Colleen Capriani, who was planning to join us on this panel, but because of a family emergency, she was needed to leave town. So if you could keep her close to your heart, that would be fantastic. Please help me welcome these wonderful ladies, and I'm going to turn it over to you now, Dr. Nerger.
Thank you. These go on automatically? Look at that. Well, I'm honored to be the moderator this morning and share this time with you and a group of amazing CSU leaders who are also my friends and colleagues. I too am sorry that Colleen Cipriani is unable to be here. She's our Vice President of Inclusive Excellence. We're going to miss her voice today, for sure, but we're fortunate to have Sue join us. And it was very interesting. We found out that Colleen couldn't be with us yesterday, and we were in the provost office going, well, we've got to think of somebody else that could sit in on the panel this morning. And Sue walks out of her office, and we said, Sue. And Sue goes, what? I go, where are you at 10 tomorrow? She goes, wherever you need me. And I mean, this is the way these women are, right? It's, where do you need me? What do we got to do? I'm there. And that's just an example. And we didn't say anything like you're going to have to be vulnerable. And I noticed that she used that word, and we won't do that, Sue. But it's been a privilege to stand alongside these women over the years and support their impactful work. I've benefited from their experience, their guidance, and their wisdom, and I'm sure you're going to as well today. So about 3 years ago, Inside Higher Ed published an opinion piece by two senior women leaders from Purdue and Miami University. And the article, which was called Women in Leadership, Challenges and Recommendations, discussed the progress that has been made for women in higher ed, as well as the challenges that still remain. And it made a call for a new mindset in supporting women students, faculty, and administrators on campuses. And the authors made a case that even in the top positions in universities, women, and especially women of color, face significant challenges within institutional structures and systems, and that there's still transformative change that needs to take place. So here's a short excerpt from the article that gives another point made by the authors. It is rare that women leaders across different parts of the higher education sector get a chance to sit down and share their experiences with each other. That's probably not the result of the differences across our delivery of academic programs or reluctance to talk to one another, but more that of a time famine, a term that came into being in 1999 to describe the universal feeling of having too much to do, but simply not enough time to do it. And I think everybody in this room have experienced time famine many, many times. But for today, we are actually taking that time to sit down and share our experiences. And that's what we're going to do in today's panel. So panelists, I'm going to direct each question to a particular person, but I also want you all to feel free that if you want to add something in afterwards, your own experience or something that you'd like to say, to please feel free to do that as well. Do not interrupt each other, though. That would be rude. I was looking directly at Lisa. No, I have 10 questions. We're going to take, a couple, 3, and then I'm going to pause and have the audience participate. Audience, actually, I looked up that word last night, and it just means sort of this passive group of people sitting there in the dark. Isn't that funny? So I look at you and I go, that is not an audience. That is a group of people that are ready to participate. So you're participants. So start thinking. But the first question I have is for you, Blanche, Dr. Hughes. The late author, poet, and professor of civil rights activist Maya Angelou once said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Blanche, tell us a time in your life when someone made you feel a certain way and you've never forgotten it in your leadership role. And then what did it teach you?
Okay, thank you, Jan. First of all, hope that you all can understand me. I have sinus that has settled in my throat, but I am fine, and that's just the way it is. So we will go forward with it. So this was really kind of an easy question for me because I always go back to this moment. And, you know, I'm director of Black Student Services, which is now called the Black African American Cultural Center. You know, I have my PhD, I'm teaching, I'm connecting with these amazing students and working with deans, and I mean, I'm living my best life, you know, career-wise. And the Associate Vice President of Student Affairs, her name's Dr. Cheryl Presley, African-American woman. We're chatting one day, and she tells me, she says, you know, one day you are going to have my job. And I looked at her, and I thought, oh, I don't think so. I said, why would I want to be an associate vice president, first of all? I don't want to be in the administration building. We make fun of you people in the administration building. Why would I want to do that? I mean, I just, you know, and why would you think I could do that anyway? And she said, you do great work with students, and in all that you do, she goes, but if you really want to make systemic change, then people like us have to be at the table. As hard as it is, as lonely as it is, the sacrifices you will make to do that, if we want to make change, particularly around issues with women and people of color, if you're not at that table, the same systems are going to stay in place because they don't hear other voices. So she said, so just want you to think about that. At the time, it annoyed me that she said that, and I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. But I actually did end up in her job. And every time I would look at promotion opportunities, I think about what she said. And I think in this time of history that I had the opportunity to be where I am, I have the responsibility to make sure that others are able to come before me. And what I have learned from that is it's so true. Being part of the leadership team for 15 years, being at the table, being able to share a different perspective from people who just didn't, not that they didn't care, mostly, but because they didn't know. You don't have different people at the table who have had different experiences, then you're gonna keep doing the same old thing that isn't working for so many people historically that are part of our community. And just to be able to do that, not only about racial issues or diversity issues, but about students too, because many of my colleagues don't work directly with students. And to say, here's a good thing we're gonna do, here's a new policy, and to be able to say, well, have you thought about how that might impact students? Have you thought about how that might impact staff that work with students or our faculty? And then they're like, oh, they didn't. So, yes, I think that is something that I go back to all the time. And actually, she's retired now, and I actually had an opportunity to thank her for that at a conference. She lives in Boston now, so.
I'm going to follow up with a question.
Yo, that's not on my list.
It's not on your list.
Okay.
But do you sometimes get tired being that voice at the table?
Yes. Yes. I get tired. Sometimes I get frustrated. Mm-hmm. You know, I've had experiences where I felt like some really good discussions, and then people leave. And like you were saying, we're all so busy, they go back to doing the same thing they've always done. And I still have to hold all of that. I always have to hold all of that because that's part of my responsibility. And hopefully people come after me, maybe they won't have to have as much of that burden that I've had. But
you're leading.
Yeah.
That's what a leader is.
That's what a leader is.
And we thank you for that, Blanche. Karen, Dr. Estlund. Okay, I'm going to throw a question you don't even know is coming. No, I'm kidding. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Ready.
How have you built a core foundation of confidence and resiliency over the course of your career? And does it require a constant recalibration for women in leadership throughout our lives?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Jan picked me for this question because she knows that I was sprung out of my mother's womb saying I can control the world and tell it what to do. So I have a little bit of a different perspective, I think, than is usually expected. Women are not expected to be confident. They're expected to be humble. We are criticized for being ambitious or assertive, and I have always been those things. And so I think the thing that I really learned over my career and has made the biggest difference is that I really do need to show that vulnerability. And one of the things that I always point to is when I was at Penn State, I was an associate dean. All the other associate deans went on to become deans. My dean didn't believe in interim or acting deans, so all of a sudden I was for associate deans. And I talked to a lot of people and they're like, well, Karen, why didn't you just say no? And it's because I truly thought I could do it. I was like, I'm invincible. This is something I can do. But realizing that I couldn't. I got sick, I got the shingles, it was bad, and I ended up talking to a lot of people in the organization and being vulnerable about what I couldn't do. And that created a space for them to thrive and to feel confident. And so that was the biggest lesson that I learned, is that my confidence wasn't really useful unless it was matched with that vulnerability. And letting people actually help, because most people want to help, can give them the confidence, if they didn't have that, to make a big impact.
That's really interesting. Sorry, it's also interesting that I said this to you yesterday. You don't always have to say yes. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yeah. I just think I'm invincible, though.
I know.
I can do it all.
You can. That's the problem. Every one of you can. Famine of time. Dr. Youngblade. Lisa. How would you encourage women to persevere in their leadership goals as they encounter personal hardships or professional obstacles?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Nerger. She knows that I study resilience in my field, and that's what this word is about. So this is the audience participation part, because you already heard two of the points I'm going to make in two of the words that Christy said and that our speaker said. So it's so hard to see with this like light in my eyes. So you can just shout it out. What are the two words that you heard? Okay, it starts with an F. Fortitude. Okay. What was the other one? Starts with a B. Belonging. There we go. Right? And so it's what I'm going to tell you is science-based. And this is the advice I would give. And I can tell you there is a long history of studying this in lots of different ways. And then I'm going to add one point to the end. But the first is really thinking about the strength in yourself and really thinking about what it is that you have that are qualities that allow you to persevere in all of life, right? In all different things, in your personal life, in friendships, and so on, and utilizing that as a strength base to approach professional obstacles. Most importantly, though, we get that strength through relationships. There is a huge literature that talks about resiliency from the perspective of drawing on strengths from people that we know, surrounding ourselves with the people that get inside and tell us, yes, you can do it. We're here to help you. We've set a pathway for it. And actually, I have lived this by interacting with all of the women on this stage. Sometimes it's laughing, sometimes it's a martini or one, just one. Sometimes it's a rant, sometimes it's, like advice, but all of these things, the strength I draw and the ideas I get are never my own. They're always empowered by the group around. So I want to say that the two most important things to resilience are that internal fortitude, that sense of belonging and drawing on that belonging to draw the strengths of others. I think another important point, and this took me a little while to figure out, is that it's so critical for us to remember that we have choices, right? And in particular, when there's a narrative that says you got here because somebody else did something for you, it takes that choice away. But I'm looking at every single woman on this stage and all of you that I can see and the shadows I can see because the light's in my eye. Every one of you are in this room because you made choices. You had the power because of your strength and the strength of people around you, the resilience that you have to make a choice. Sometimes we make a choice by changing the situation, by going somewhere else. Other times we advocate and fight for a choice to make the situation better for us. But I think that's another important piece of advice in persevering. And then the very last thing, and sometimes we talk about this in words like passion, sometimes we talk about it in words like goals, but there's got to be something that sets fire in your belly that you are just beholden to do, that keeps you going no matter what is in your way. I think about Karen as kind of a good example of this, of head through the wall, we're going to get it done. And so I think those are the 4 magic ingredients. Strength in yourself, strength from others, remembering you have powers, you're brilliant, you have choices, and then utilizing those to make a choice and determine your own destiny.
Really, really well said. I like the head through the wall, too, because there's a lot of walls. Sometimes you can't move the wall, you gotta power through it. Let's pause and see if there are any questions for the panelists from the participants. Yes?
How would you suggest we approach systemic change?
What was the last one?
Beyond having, oh, go ahead.
Oh, how would you, beyond having a seat, just having a seat at the table, how would you approach systemic change? What else can we do?
For me, what has worked has been building relationships. Really? So, and fortunately, I like to do that, so it's authentic. You know, it's not just doing it because it's a strategy, but it's also because I truly do like to meet people and find out their story. And then I try to share my story. Somewhere in there's always some parts of those stories that intersect, and there's also sometimes where they're very different. But it helps me to understand them better and for them to understand me better. So for me, it goes, forget what position you're in, it's who are you as a human being? And who am I? And then what is your story? Because part of who I am is my background. And part of who you are is also your background. So I think I start with that, having patience, having a sense of humor, loving what you do, right? And do what fits for you. So those are some of the strategies that have worked for me over time. And I guess an optimism. People have accused me of not only being the glass half full kind of person, they're like, Blanche, you're like the glass is overflowing kind of person. I will honestly say I'm probably not as much that way going through COVID and everything that's happened in the last few years around social justice and the craziness that's happened in our world right now, every time we turn on the news in the morning. So I'm probably not as overflowing, but I have to have hope. I have to have hope. And so I draw on all of those things and just the love that I believe people can change, people can grow. And if we take the time to do that, then those people will be in positions to then make changes to the system, right? Because who owns the systems? We do. We own those systems. We can change those systems.
Anyone else? Yeah, right here in front.
We should look at each other not by externals. Don't look at someone and make an assumption of the way they are just because of the way they look or the gender or the color of their skin.
I absolutely agree. We immediately make a whole story in our mind by looking at somebody, and we really have no idea. We don't know the stories that compile that individual. Yeah.
I would add to that, though, is then ask yourself, why did you make those assumptions? And where did that come from? Because those reflections are really important, and a lot of times we don't do that. And if something makes you uncomfortable around anything, honestly, ask yourself, why is it making you uncomfortable? And then that may help you to say, what ways do you still need to grow? I want you to see me as a woman of color. I want you to see me because who I am, why I am here, my ancestors that helped me to get here, my parents, their stories, that's really important to me. That's who I am. So to say, well, I don't see your color, that doesn't work for me. Please do. Please do. Now, don't make assumptions about that, right? But please see my difference. Because that's important for all of us to understand. It's important for me to see your difference too. And not make assumptions, negative assumptions. But if you do, because we all have biases, ask yourself why. And then make sure you reflect and work on that.
Yeah, you and I have had talks about that.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't like the word privilege.
No, you don't.
And she knows that.
do.
It's a word that I don't like, and it triggers me. I understand what the word means,
Yep.
but it's just not a word that I care for because you don't know my background,
That's true. I said,
right?
Yep.
So anyway, we have these conversations, and I love
Yep.
the fact that we can do that.
Yes.
Right? We live in a
Yes.
world where we should be able to have these conversations. Advantages, yes. Anyway. We can have these conversations, is the point. Anything else at this? Yeah.
This question is for anyone who would like to answer. Working at an institution that primarily serves a great deal of young people, what are some of the unique strengths or possibilities do you see among young women today?
Bold. I do. I am inspired. I am in awe. I see a fierceness and a bravery and a willingness to ask questions, not because of the way we always did things, but because of possibilities of the way we can do things in the future. And so I will say this has been just something I've been thinking about recently and actually kind of reflecting on role of somebody in a leadership position to serve as a mentor. And what I find is that's a little bit patronizing, right? I'm gonna serve as a mentor and you're gonna benefit from my experience. When the truth is, I feel so inspired by watching all of your experiences and the world that's open to you and the fact that you are gonna be change makers.
And I would add to that, not just the boldness, but the boldness to question authority. I think I see more in young people today than I did when I started as a professor here 29 years ago. And I think it's related to all the stuff that's been going on in the world in the last many years, but it is inspiring, and keep it up, please, because we need it. That's part of how we get to that systemic change.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Sue, I'm going to direct the next question to you. How can women aspiring to be great leaders navigate power structures? And are there additional layers that women of color and other marginalized groups need to navigate?
Ooh, that's a doozy. So it is something you learn as you kind of go through your journey of your career, and to become a leader is to understand the power dynamics so that you can navigate them. And that's the beginning of it, really. I mean, I'll never forget as an assistant professor when I was trying to get what's now called the School of Biomedical Engineering going, when it finally dawned on me that I was walking into meetings where the meeting had been had before I got there and a decision had been made before I got there, and I was naive enough to think we were actually going to have an open, transparent discussion and then make a decision. So I started having my own meetings before the meetings in order to sort of counteract that power dynamic. Now, the thing is, though, if we want systemic change, we can't just keep acting like the people who are running the organization, right? So now I try to avoid the meeting before the meeting by having the open dialogue with everyone and making sure that the discussions happen, but in a transparent way, so that when everyone walks into the meeting, they all have the same information, they understand the history and the background and the context. So the other piece of that is knowing who has the power and who is the decision maker, because you'd think you should be able to tell that by looking at the org chart, but you can't always. So you have to understand the power dynamics, I think, well enough to navigate that. I would go back to what we've already heard, which is relationships help a lot with navigating power dynamics, especially the higher you get in an organization. And it takes time to build relationships. And so one of the things that I've always shared with people I've mentored or been mentored by is build the relationships, take the time to go for the cup of coffee or the martini, whatever it takes. And we started this session talking about a time famine. That's one of the things you've got to give time to in your career, are those relationships. And finding the mentors and the mentees that will help you navigate your career, and you need lots of them. And being a mentor, you learn just as much as being a mentee, so you want to actually be on both sides of those relationships at different places in the power dynamics of the organization, because you will learn a lot, and that will help you navigate those power dynamics.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa.
Ooh, I didn't address the second part of your question, I just realized.
Oh my goodness, no, you did not. Are there additional layers that women of color and other marginalized groups need to navigate?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. But there really is, right? The intersectional identities, whether it's you're a woman of color or you're LGBTQ or whatever it is, just pile on. For instance, the implicit bias that you run into, they make the power dynamics even harder to navigate. And there's plenty of research out there that shows this, right? Like a recent thing that came out in the National Academy publication shows that people of color, scientists who are people of color's papers take 20% longer time to review than people who are white, essentially. Same thing with trying to get grants funded, same thing with trying to get into the national academies. And so these other minoritized identities really actually work synergistically in an unfortunate way to make it even harder.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, we've talked about pushing back on resistance to change. There are people out there that simply don't like change. That might surprise you. Where have you experienced the greatest resistance when you've tried to promote change as a leader, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, because I think there's a lot of intersecting factors that come into play, right? So I probably would say I was, early in my career, started thinking about advocacy and so on, but you do it from a very vulnerable place, where in academia, you're an early career faculty member, you don't have tenure, and you look at the power structure above you, and you're so concerned about rocking the boat so that you can at least get to a point where you can make change. And I remember getting advice like, wait till you get tenure and then go for it. Like, at least do it from a position of power and so on. But I had this experience. So just a little bit of context, I did my doctorate in the 1980s, and during that time there was a lot of, we were in the midst of mommy wars. Some of you might remember this, like mom should stay at home or they should go to work, and there was shaming on both sides. And a lot of research came out at that time, and I got my first faculty job kind of at the height of that, and was talking to a female colleague at my new place who was telling me about going to faculty meetings just a few years prior when she had her children, 2 days after giving birth. And I was like, how did you do that? And she said, I brought a donut and I sat on it, not a donut you eat, the kind you sit on. And maybe there were donuts there that you eat, but anyway, hers was, medical necessity. And I was like, isn't there, time? And she's like, yes, there's time, but it was made really clear to me that if I want to have a voice in anything, I need to be at the table at all times. And that was just this remarkable thing to me. And so fast forward from 1990 to now 2006, and I'm starting here at CSU and thinking we have evolved tremendously. And I come here and have a pregnant faculty member who's asking about parental leave policies. And I'm like, oh, I'm certain it's the whole semester. That's kind of what it is. And it turns out we didn't even have a policy here at CSU. 2006, that's not that long ago. So that for me was an eye-opening point of, just reflection point, and then what to do about it. And so trained as I am to think about support systems, the first people I went to were women leaders on this campus and said, do you know this? Can we do something together? Can we work? Can we advocate? Can somebody that's at a higher level than me push it forward? And we do. So now fast forward, and here's a good news piece. 2017, 2023, sorry, we missed a few years there, have a male faculty member who is taking full parental leave, not just the leave that's given to us to bond with a new child, but the full amount that his wife is taking to take care of her during this time, and CSU has a policy because of federal law that allows it. So I think there are ways, I guess the point of this is, like, there are always those things we want to advocate for, and a lesson for me is knowing who your allies are in that advocacy, knowing where your strength is, where your challenge is, and where you can push.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
I was just going to add about the parental leave thing too, because I've lived a similar timeline here. When I had my kids, there was no parental leave policy for faculty, and we've made progress. However, some recent studies done right around the time the pandemic started at another public R1 university of a lot of STEM faculty on science, technology, engineering, and math showed that there is still a great penalty for being a caregiver, particularly mothers, but any kind of caregiver, to the point where you have, women on engineering and science faculties trying to pass as non-mothers today because they know that they will be penalized in their performance review, even though all the metrics about their performance show that they work as hard, they're just as productive, they publish as much, they bring in just as many grants. But there is still this implicit bias that if you're a caregiver, you can't be devoted enough to your job, and thus you aren't as excellent. So we got to keep fighting the battle. It's not over yet.
Well said.
Quick thing, because I think that Lisa really hit on the point when talking about faculty and tenure. I still remember a story when I was a brand new faculty member and I was at new faculty orientation, and everyone was talking about what you needed to do to get tenure, and someone said, well, digital humanities is a new thing. How come I can't use that to get tenure? And the provost said, I don't care. This is your peers who actually make that decision. And I think one of the things that I have found, particularly in the academy, that is one of the biggest obstacles to change is people not taking the power that they do have and becoming the victims or saying, this can't happen for me, when actually you do have the power to change things.
Yeah, very, very good point. I think we should all go out today and change something. Got to think of what we're going to do. Blanche, this next question I have you in mind for, and because you and I have talked about this also, not because we're the eldest up here.
Of course not.
It's not why I thought of us. But another quote from Maya Angelou, reflecting all of her wisdom and her life experiences and grace. Dr. Angelou once said, at 50, I began to know who I was. It was like waking up to myself. When did you begin to know who you really were as a leader in higher education?
So I thought a lot about that, and actually I'd say in the last couple of years. And I wish this had happened when I was 50. I'm 67 now. But I think going through COVID, and I'm very extroverted, right? And so, and relationships and all that. So it was really hard for me when we had to work at home and had to do everything by Zoom and not having that personal interaction. We were also going through leadership changes at the time. So again, I've been here for a while. Most of my years in my leadership role had been with the previous administration. And so I was part of that group, and a new administration comes in. People were leaving, things were changing, at work. The world was going crazy. And I really thought about retiring at that point to say, do I have the energy to continue to do this? Has it even made a difference of the things that I've done all these years? It's like, we're still a mess. Students are still complaining and concerned and dealing with the same issues. as college students that I dealt with. And it's like, is it ever going to change? Is it worth it? However, it made me start to think about, but if I did that, if I retired, what would I do? You know, my career, my life is really tied into my work because I love what I do. I could bother my children, but I don't think they would appreciate that. You know, my husband was already retired. I didn't like the TV shows that he was looking at. And I just had this burning that I still love what I do, right? And there's still purpose. And I still love the relationships, and I still love Colorado State University, because this is where I work. So, you know, I started to think about that, and I started to think about things that I've done and what I've contributed. And you know, I kind of started thinking about that, and part of it was like, you know what, Blanche, you are kind of a badass. Because I've never given myself credit for that, right? And I thought, and I'm ready to do some other stuff. I'm not ready to give up yet. And so I think that really was a turning, because before you're just doing it, right? You know, I've been working, I started family early, so I'm raising my kids, you know, I'm doing my work, I'm trying to be a good partner, I'm trying to do all these things that I thought that I had to do. I was a great daughter, I was the youngest kid, I grew up in Kentucky and you know, first generation student. I always felt like I was doing stuff that I had to do. And I'm finally at a point where I feel like what you were saying, Lisa, I do have choices. I always had choices. I never felt like I did. And actually, some of us have better choices than others. So in some ways, I had some choices, but the other choices of not going to college were not good. So, but now I'm at a point where I do feel like I have choices. I feel like I've been here long enough that I have the responsibility, that when I can see that things can happen, I can speak up for those things. Because what are they gonna do? I can retire, and I'll be fine. I just choose not to. But still do it in a respectful way, because that's my personality. I believe that you try to make those changes. So yeah, I think I got a few more good years. So I'm excited about that, but it took some reflection, and I wish I had done this earlier. So that's the message I would give to all of you. Always know that what you're doing, you could do more, you could do something different, and you could do it someplace else. Give yourself choices. You can always choose to stay, but give yourself choices and know that you earn it and you deserve it and you've worked for it. So,
Isn't she good? I tell you. Thank you, Blanche. Sue. The balance question. Every woman that's been on a panel knows you get this one. How have you balanced your career, personal life, and passions as a leader in higher ed? And is there really such thing as a balance for women?
I have to say yes, I do think there is such a thing, because I couldn't do it otherwise. And instead of thinking of it as work-life balance, I like to think of it as life-work balance, because life is actually more important than work, even though many of us forget that sometimes. And I think a number of different ways. I have a secret weapon. He's called a house husband. I highly recommend them. I've had that secret weapon for 30 years now, and it really has enabled my career. But I say that kind of jokingly, because that really is a privilege in a way. Most people don't have that luxury. But especially when I was younger and having kids and all that, it made a huge difference. But I think one has to really deliberately put life before work and require that balance. You know, I was talking about that dogma of work devotion and how caregivers take a penalty earlier. And it really is a dogma, but I think it's a bit of a false one, but that it happens in all organizations, but I think in the academy we fall for it more, that if we don't all work, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, we're not working hard enough. But we started talking about a time famine, and it is important to value your time and give your time to your family, as our speaker was saying earlier when she spoke, right, about prioritizing time with her kids and stuff. So it has to be deliberate, you have to throw out this false notion that you have to work all the time to be excellent, because it's not true. And then you have to surround yourself with the relationships and the support that you need, and take advantage of those and give back to those people too, right? Because with those relationships, you help each other. And I know I've always cultivated a series of relationships, for instance, with women and women leaders around campus since I first came to CSU. And to this day, I fall back on those relationships to support me, or I support them, depending on who needs it. You know, Blanche was talking earlier really about sort of getting over the imposter syndrome. And even though the higher you get up in the organization and the more of a leader you are, it's easier, but it still comes back to you. I don't know that it ever stops. And so that's when you call on your support team, like, oh my God, I'm feeling like a failure or whatever it is, and they tell you how badass you are, and then you get right back up on the horse again, so.
Anyone else believe? See, I don't even believe in balance. So that was actually very interesting to hear from you. Yeah.
I
Karen?
think the only thing that I want to add, and this goes back to some of the expectations for women. So as a woman who chose not to have children, part of my work-life balance is explaining to everyone why I chose not to have children, which is not something I expected. And so I think that, and I love my partner, and we have a great life and a wonderful dog. But the medical advice that I get, the other kinds of things that come my way because I've chosen not to have children, I think that's an important thing to consider when we talk about work-life balance in women too, is that some of us have chosen not to have families and are happy. I'm a great aunt and godmother.
And that's good. And that's, I do think, like Sue says, we all find the balance in different ways. Because I do think it exists, but it's a pendulum, and it kind of swings. It never sets. Lisa.
No, and I think two things just to add. One, I'm just remembering my aunt, who's quite elderly now, but she had a PhD. She got it in the 1970s. She already had kids and was, just really a role model for me in watching her navigate. And I asked her what her secret is, and she's like, just do the best you can and don't expect to be perfect at anything. And I think that for me has always been something about balance, like making sure to take care of the most precious priorities, but not having to be an ace at every single thing that you do. And that actually takes a lot of the pressure off. The other thing I'm thinking about, the generation of people coming up, that is the number one killer of balance is this, right? So I think back to earlier in my career when you'd go on vacation and nobody could find you because they couldn't call you. And now my husband, he'll be like, why are you on your phone? I'm like, well, there might be an emergency and I need to know about it. So that's one place that I struggle too, is with technology and just knowing that you can be, on call all the time and really having to be conscious about that. So to the, people coming up in the world, be cautious about that. And protect that time alone.
I guess I'd say I started my career really with children. And so I used to find trying to balance, and I went to sessions about balancing, and I found it really gave me more stress. So I just changed the term and said, I can't, it's never balanced. I just try to manage it. So I try to manage my life. Sort of means the same, but it felt better to me because there was one more thing I was striving to do, was to balance. You just can't balance with a full-time job, going to school, 4 kids, a spouse. Things just happen. And so I don't even try to do that anymore. It's like, I just try to manage it as best I can, given what I do. So if you don't like the terminology, just switch it, and it makes you feel better.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Karen, next question for you. Ready?
I'm ready.
How important is mentorship in reaching our career and life aspirations? And when I say mentorship, it includes both finding the right mentor and to advance your career, making yourself available to be a mentor, just the whole concept of mentorship.
Yeah, this is another huge one, and I look forward to what some of the other panelists will say. Blanche and I were just talking about this the other day when we met and how much we enjoy mentoring. And I think for me, I didn't have formal mentor programs growing up in my career. They were not really available to me, particularly because I was an IT person in libraries, so I was considered other, right? I was on a different track. There were not folks on the IT that could or were willing to mentor me in that way. So one of the things that I did as a young professional, and this comes back to some of my confidence, I guess, is I emailed the CIO at the institution, and I was like, will you have coffee with me once a month? She was a woman of color. I learned so much from her. Our conversations were amazing. And I think that really, those conversations still informed who I became as a leader. So trying to give back, I think mentoring is a very important thing. And I'm involved in lots of formal programs, but also informal programs. And I think one of my favorite things that I have worked on is created a community of women library IT leaders. And so that we actually support each other in a network and have a group where it is a collaborative of mentoring. It's not just individuals mentoring each other. And that has been probably the most positive thing that I feel that I have done in that space that has both helped me and helped others.
Yeah, Sue?
I have to plug our mentoring circles that we offer right now for faculty. So if you go to facultysuccess.colostate.edu, you'll see among the other programs there, it's called Encircle. And we will be running those again all next academic year. So I encourage you to sign up for those. And I would add to Karen's anecdote, because I had a somewhat similar but opposite experience as an assistant professor, as a woman in engineering, and there weren't very many then. There still aren't very many, actually. And I went over to the one full professor in the college's office. She was in another department and knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. And she said, don't even come into my office, because she was so soured on her own career, she didn't want to give that sourness to me. And that was a hard thing to hear as an assistant professor, a very hard thing. And I remember going home to my partner and being like, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. But I persevered, and I just kept looking for other mentors, just as Karen just described, and found people, even outside the College of Engineering in my case, who were really great mentors for me, and now I do the same thing and try to pass it on.
Who was your first mentor? Anyone want to?
My first and most of my mentors have been men, which is something I think is important to point out. Your mentors don't have to share identities with you necessarily, although it's nice to have mentors who do. But it was a full professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering who took me under his wing, showed me how to run the rampant, so to speak. And to this day, I still feel extremely grateful to him.
Anyone else? All right, then. Oh, Lisa? I saw that microphone going up.
Yes, my first mentor was a professor I had as an undergraduate, and I came across her by taking a class that I just had to take, as was on my list. I was in a different field and had to take an elective, and was so impressed, and just in 10 minutes fell in love with the topic area, and then became one of this undergraduate that just wouldn't leave her alone. I was in her office hours all the time, and but she became a mentor on the possibilities in research, possibilities to go to graduate school, possibilities to teach, all these things I had never ever thought about before. And also how to have fun. She had the best taste in music, went camping all the time, could talk about hieroglyphics that she saw in caves in Eastern Oregon, all these amazing things. So mentorship for person too, and just how to have a complete kind of approach.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw it back to the audience one more time. Yeah.
First a comment and then a question. I was a student here, graduated, got my first degree in '73, and a profound influence was hearing Maya Angelou speak here at CSU in this building. And I've used her quotes since then, but it really had a profound impact on my life and my, frankly, returning to CSU. So I'm just fascinated, or it's so serendipitous that you're quoting Maya Angelou, and I use one of her quotes when I give presentations regularly. I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. So that's my comment. And then my question is, I've worked in healthcare, still trying to be retired, but still worked in healthcare for over 30 years. And one of the sayings we had in hospitals is that nurses eat their young. Meaning that nurses and healthcare folks are not particularly supportive of their colleagues, that you'd better be up to speed and you'd better be up to speed quickly. I'm wondering if there's, it sounds like there isn't, I'm hoping there isn't, but is there still some of that within the college setting that, do you all eat your young? You want to be supportive of women, but are you as supportive as you think you could be? And you've given some great examples of how you are supportive, but yeah, so my question is, how do you support each other, and is there any of that eating of the young going on in the university?
So maybe I'll start because I was eaten. So I think one of the things that really struck me as an early career person, I became a manager when I was 25. I was a department head. I skipped 10 years of my career. A woman in the library where I worked who was in her 50s, and a whole other group of women tried to take me down. And they tried to take me down because they didn't believe that a 25-year-old could tell them what to do or have any sort of responsibility. And, you know, I've been a professional now for about 20 years, and I will say I have seen a marked change in the way women support women in that 20 years. And I do think it's generational, and I think it is getting better. And a lot of the resistance and the people trying to keep you down or have you go through exactly what they did, I do think that is dissipating. But it still is there in academia, for sure.
I would just add to that, that it goes back to the power dynamics question, right? Because the people in power, if they can get the people with less power fighting and not supporting and arguing against each other, it keeps them from getting the power they need. And one of my best friends is a nurse, so I can totally relate to what you said. It's a tough profession, and hopefully the mentoring ideas can spread there as well, because I agree with what Karen said, that generationally we're in a better place now than we used to be with regard to those power dynamics.
So too, and I think we have to, right? There's an imperative for this, because any of the problems that we face are big, gnarly, hairy problems, and they can't be solved by individuals. And so again, 30 years ago, when I got my start anyway, was sink or swim, find your own independent path, like just do your work. And now the dynamic and the conversation, even how we train students, is much more interdisciplinary. We need teams of people to solve big, hairy problems. And so by doing that, we're kind of forcing this, that we have to ensure the success of people coming in. So I do think it's changed. And we've, even when I started in 2006, there weren't mentoring programs in units. I think now if we surveyed all department heads on campus, the majority would say, yes, I have a mentoring program that's expected in my unit. So we've evolved, and that's a good thing. That's part of hope.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Jan, for you or any of the other panelists. This was provided by one of our guests ahead of time, and it is maybe a different spin on the power dynamics or the choices that are being made today with respect to philanthropic dollars. And we're hoping you can talk a little bit about the impact of the name, image, and likeness, relatively new situation that is affecting athletics, and if or how that has affected other charitable giving here at CSU, or perhaps some of the opportunities that are going forward, and how those opportunities are framed now that NIL is a thing here at CSU and elsewhere.
Maybe I'll start, and then Blanche, you can jump in on this one. I'm going to point you out, right? Delegating to Blanche. It's just, but I think that one of the things that I do really admire, one of the many things about Blanche, is that she has always been very supportive of our student athletes and figuring out how what they need to do to succeed academically. So I think one of the things, and just I'm not sure everybody knows the context, but a lot of our student athletes now have the ability to actually market their own image. They can sell themselves professionally. So I think to the question about what does this mean for donors giving to a professional sport, perhaps? Is it a professional sport? I think that's one of the questions that people are asking. I think it's great. I think that a lot of our student athletes have not been able to have power over their own identities, and that this gives them that power. And it is an interesting complication that we'll see how that does affect things going longer term about donations and whether or not our sports really are professional. I think some of the great things that we could actually do is actually help those students figure out, what does it mean to manage your identity? What does it mean to market yourself? Can we give them the skills that will help them be the better athletes that they want to be and the people they want to be? I used to joke, I still joke with Joe Parker, that if we really want to stand out for our athletic program, we should totally make it an activist athletic program and say we're going to make all the next Colin Kaepernicks. How do we say, like, it's okay if you want to be a Colin Kaepernick, and we're going to support you and give you the skills to have a voice, because as an athlete, you do have power, and more power than other people might have in our society.
Yes, and a lot of right now, it's the NIL stuff is focused on the sport, football, right? Football, men's basketball, the sports that everybody see, the revenue supposed to produce these sports. And so I know one of the things that has concerned me are what about our women athletes and our Olympic sport athletes, your track, field, the ones that don't have the big dollar sign. And I know that there have been people that have stepped up, to form, I forget, they're called collectives or something. I'm still learning. The people outside that are helping to negotiate the deals for the student athletes, because athletic department can't really do that. There's still rules around that. And I've said, well, who's doing this for the women athletes? And who's reaching out to the women in our community who perhaps have the financial ability to support our women athletes? Is anybody even asking them? I mean, is that something that this group might want to look into as a project? Because I get to work with the class that I teach, that they talked about I teach. It's a first-year seminar class for student athletes. And so for the past 8 years, I've had over 200 or some student athletes that have been in my class, that I've had them for a whole year. And so I've gotten to know them really well. So many of them are first generation, the majority actually. Many low-income students, and also our students of color. But they are just amazing young people who spend 20 to 30 hours a week on their sport, in addition to being a full-time student. And I was a student athlete, so that I have a certain love for that. And so anyway, I think that it's an opportunity, but once again, if we don't do it right, it will still benefit a small amount of our student athletes. And that even includes football and basketball players, because the ones getting the big bucks are the stars, right? What about the other people, the O-line? I love offensive linemen, because I have all these students in my class. I know all the positions. I watch the people who make the touchdown happen instead of just the touchdown. Right. That's what replays are for. But so I do think it's a wonderful opportunity as we think about philanthropy to make sure that, again, we're looking at equity along with the training and helping these students understand, because they don't. And so what does this mean? And their families don't understand. So how are we educating them along the way so that they can get some benefit from this, which I think is good. But will it just become another one thing to make athletics even more inequitable than it already is? How can we help that not happen? So, thank you.
I like when you said O-line.
Offensive line.
I know what it meant eventually, but you're just so impressive.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to wrap it up with a final question that I'm going to ask all of you to answer, but I can't help but bring our friend Maya back in. So, you know, if you read Maya Angelou's work, and especially what she talks about in leadership, basically, without quoting her, she just reminds us that you need to lead with authenticity, courage, and heart. And I think that's what makes a great leader, and it makes all of our efforts worthwhile. And I was thinking, though, that's not something you go into leadership maybe knowing. It's something that you gain through time and experience. So if you had a chance to talk to your 25-year-old self, who may not know that, what advice would you give her on leadership?
I'll start on that one, because for me, a very obvious answer comes to mind, and that is that it's okay to cry in a professional setting. And the reason I say that is I'm one of these emotional people who cries pretty easily, right? Everybody's different in this way, right? And I can remember when I was my 25, 26, 27-year-old self trying really hard to hold back those tears, which were usually indicative of my passion about the subject that I was talking about in a meeting. And how hard it was to do that, and it was usually pretty obvious anyway. Like I remember the first time I went to ask for money to start the biomedical engineering program here, and how I almost cried in the meeting in front of the provost and the vice president for research, and went home like kicking myself, but I got the money, right? And so I think that's part about being authentic, is you have to be who you really are, and when you try to hold that back, it not only hurts you in your career, but it hurts you achieving the objectives that you want. And, you know, I mentioned the relationships and friendships. Well, one of my really close friends told me that I taught her that professionally finally, that, you know, she could be herself in a meeting. Now, she's not a crier like me, but she's got, you know, her own personality traits, and that by trying to hold them back, it didn't help.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa?
So I think the word that comes to mind for me that I would say is trust, and trust in a couple ways. To trust your gut. I think early on I didn't. I was always looking for, like, is this the right thing? Am I doing this the right way? But really just like thinking about trusting, and the looking at others' part, trust that too. Trust the support that you have and that you draw. The things I talked about when we first started having this conversation. And I think the other part, and this I probably wouldn't have appreciated so much at 25, but I certainly do now, and it's really the word of humility, and thinking about just the bravery of women that have gone before, and the lessons and the pathway that they have paved, and what that responsibility brings to you then to continue pushing that path just a little bit more forward, because there are people coming behind you and with you, and together we're stronger.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to point us back to what Lisa and our speaker already said, which is the importance of belonging. I don't think I realized how important it was to be in an environment where I felt supported, where my values were aligned. And one of the greatest things that I learned, and actually during my interview at CSU, it was 2:12 in the afternoon, and I looked down, and there on the ground was the bicycle lane with the ram with the helmet. And I looked up, and there were the skateboard racks. And I said, you know what? This is a place that actually says you can be who you are. And you would think, Karen, skateboard racks, what are you talking about? I cannot tell you how many conversations I had at other institutions about what to do about the problematic skateboarders, right? This is a place where I felt like I belonged and I could be part of something here. And I think the 25-year-old me didn't even realize that was a possibility, that there could be a place where I belonged. And I think the other thing that I would just add is being a dean also really lets me be who I am because I'm in a position of power. And so I would tell the 25-year-old me, you can be who you are now, but just wait and see, and you can really be who you are once you're in charge.
Okay. I think I would, 25-year-old, I thought that recognize that I did have leadership skills, that I was a leader. Because no one really told me that I was. I just did stuff. And because it needed to be done. But no one just kind of took me aside to say, you know, that's being a leader, that's leadership skills, keep that up. So recognize that and be okay with that. Like when you do things well, take credit for that and feel good about that and acknowledge it. And not be so self-critical all the time that, so yeah, I could do this, but I could do more, I could do more. And we all can do better and grow. Sometimes we just don't take the time to really acknowledge and celebrate what we can do. And I definitely did not do that when I was 25. I wasn't good enough for anything, I had to be better. So that, and then having confidence in myself and the decisions that I made. And in that, you have to give yourself more grace. So maybe I made that decision and maybe it wasn't a good one. And you can spend all day feeling guilty about that. But you need to move on. And what did you learn from that and grow from that? And try not to make that same mistake again. And so that, and then the last thing I'd say is, you know, when I was younger, older people like my age, and older now, would say, time goes so fast. And I used to hear them say that and say, you're just old. Yeah, maybe it goes fast for you, but God, it seems like it takes forever for anything to happen, right? And that is so true. Now, that time goes really quickly, and you want to look back and make sure you had fun along the way. And no matter how hard things are, what joy have you gotten out of life? And I wish when I was 25, I would have definitely been more intentional about making sure that I enjoyed who I was, I enjoyed the things that I did, and that I really enjoyed life, because it does go really quickly. So.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about this question on my way into work today because I knew I was going to ask this question. And so I thought, what would I tell my 25-year-old self? And then I thought I would spend a lot of time convincing my 25-year-old self that I was my 60-year-old self talking to my 25-year-old self. You know, I'd have to convince her, no, this is really me talking to you. And, you know, we'd have some personal joke or something I'd have to come up with to convince her that's me. But what would I tell myself? And it would be this, it would be that. It would be, first it would be, you know, somehow develop thicker skin, because you need to do that if you're going to go into administration. You have to develop a little bit thicker skin. And then I needed to take more time for fun. That's how I found balance in life, is I skipped that part. And, you know, so that's another thing I would say. And then that kindness, be kind to yourself. Let yourself maybe not be perfect at everything. I think that's another lesson to be learned. And then the last thing I wanted to just add is that concept of, I think it was the question about eating your young, maybe, that made me think about this. But when you do reach the top, you know, you got to make sure you send the elevator back down. And that's the most important thing, I think, as leaders, is to make sure that we bring the next generation of leaders up. You know, since we can't talk to our 25-year-old self, why don't we talk to the 25-year-old people that are here now, and, you know, tell them this is your time. So at any rate, let's thank our panel for their inspiration. And let me add my thanks to each of you too. And then I think we're on schedule to take a short break, and we'll come back at 11:30 for our final session. And this is two faculty from Lisa's college, the College of Health and Human Sciences, and they're going to be discussing the value of growing the presence of women and other diverse populations in the field of construction management. So that should actually be very exciting. And that's at 11:30. We'll see you then.